Okay, go ahead, Jamie. It's all you.
Thank you so much for having us today. We are joining you from Girl Scout First headquarters downtown on Drayton Street. We do have Miss Juliette Lowe looking on behind us as well. So she's joining us in spirit. So I thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you about our Girl Scout history and our Girl Scout sisterhood in all of its many formats. So I'm going to ask Ms. Morgan to help me pull up the PowerPoint because her computer.
I'm going to, hold on one second. I will make you co-host so you can do that. Okay, go for it. Oh, and Jane's joining us too.
Hi, Miss Jane.
Where is it? Give her a second. It's connecting to audio.
Okay. Let's see if I can.
Jane.
I apologize, ladies. We'll be right there.
There
we go. Okay. So what I thought I'd start with this morning is just a brief history of Girl Scouts, of course, starting with our founder, Miss Juliette Gordon Lowe. So of course, Miss Juliette was born here in Savannah. She was born at what we call the Juliette Gordon Lowe birthplace today, which is down at the corner of Bull and Oglethorpe Streets. Her father was William Washington Gordon II, and her mother was Nellie Kinsey Gordon of Chicago. Mrs. Lowe grew up here in Savannah. She was educated at various boarding schools as well. She married William Mackey Lowe. In the 1880s, William Mackey Lowe was the son of Andrew Lowe, who was a cotton factor and merchant, and his house is located, of course, on Lafayette Square. We are located in the carriage house at that same house, and we'll get back to that a bit later in the presentation. But Andrew Lowe was Scottish, and he maintained property in Europe. And so after Juliette and Willie married, Miss Juliette, or Daisy, spent a large portion of her adult life in Europe, primarily in England and Scotland, but she did tour as well. She was widowed in the 19-teens, and around that same time she met the gentleman who founded Boy Scouts, who was Lord Robert Baden-Powell, and his photo is at the bottom of the screen in here. You can see that. And that is Miss Juliette, of course, on the right side of that same photograph. Basically, at that time, Miss Juliette, according to the standards of the day, would not have been considered a successful woman, if you will. Her marriage had failed. She was actually in the process of divorcing her husband at the time that he died. They had no children. And of course, that was kind of those were the standards by which you were judged at that time. And so she had what I kind of jokingly called a late midlife crisis and said, what do I have to show for my life? And at that time, that's about the same time she met Lord Robert Baden-Powell, who had just founded the Boy Scouts. And there was such interest from girls in the movement that he had asked his sister, Agnes, to form a sister group, the Girl Guides. And he basically said, have I got a movement for you? And so Miss Juliette joined his sister Agnes, and they formed she helped form 3 Girl Guide troops in England and Scotland before she ever started Girl Scouts in the United States. So once she became very familiar with the movement, once she became more comfortable with it, she said, all right, I'm going home. So she came back to Savannah and called her cousin Nina Anderson Pape, who had the Pape School downtown on Drayton Street. The Pape School eventually became Savannah Country Day. And she basically said, I've got something for all the girls of Savannah and all the girls of the United States and all the girls of the world, and we're going to start it tonight. And that was on March 9th, 1912. And then 3 days later, they had their first Girl Scout troop meeting on March 12th. So this is a photograph of Girl Scout First Headquarters in the early 1900s. Miss Juliet, being a good Girl Scout, used her resources wisely and took the carriage house behind her property and turned it into our first dedicated meeting space. And we're still here 108 years later. So yeah, Miss Morgan and I are actually sitting just on the other side of this door right here. So yeah, so we're still here, and First Headquarters is still going strong, and the movement that Miss Juliet founded, of course, is still going strong. Today, we count around 60 million women in the United States as Girl Scout alumni. Okay, so just a little bit of our Girl Scout history, very general history. There were 18 girls in the first Girl Scout troop. The first troop was divided into two patrols, the White Rose and the Carnation. So quite often, instead of seeing troop numbers, you'll hear about patrols, and it's usually named after something from nature. So the photo that you see on the top is Miss Juliet with troop number 6 in front of First Headquarters, and then the document that you see to the side is the official roster of who are considered the first 18 Girl Scouts. Now, the first 18 Girl Scouts were recruited from a cross-section of the Savannah community. There were relatives of Mrs. Lowe, so girls from more affluent families, wealthier families. There were girls from the Savannah Orphan Asylum, and I have had folks identify some of these girls from both Catholic, Jewish, and Protestant families. So yeah, I think it's a lovely, wonderful reflection of Savannah and Mrs. Lowe's commitment from the very beginning that Girl Scouting was going to be an open, diverse, beautiful place for all girls, Now the photo at the bottom of this particular slide is actually a picture from 1927. It was the 25th anniversary of Girl Scouts. They were actually holding the national convention here in town that particular year. They were supposed to be holding the convention this year in Orlando, so everyone was very excited because everyone wanted to go to Disney for the national convention, but unfortunately they've wound up canceling that for this year. But going back to 1927, this particular year, 25th anniversary of the convention here in Savannah. And if you see the gentleman who seems to be front and center in that particular photo, that is the mayor of Savannah at that time, and the person to whom his head is inclined, the lady to his right, is Mrs. Lou Henry Hoover. So the First Lady of the United States, the wife of Herbert Hoover. And the reason I wanted to show you this particular photo is, and if you'll pardon me, it's not very, it's slightly more pixelated now than I thought, but I just wanted to zoom in a little bit. So usually one of the features of most Girl Scout events when it's a big public event is we will pick a girl, usually one, and you know, the adults will speak, but we'll usually have one girl, and it's someone that is well-spoken and that we trust and that we know can follow instructions. And so at this particular event, the person who was chosen to speak was Miss Henrietta Victor. At that time, she was Miss Henrietta Steinheimer. I forget at this point, I apologize. And I never got the chance to speak with Miss Henrietta about it, or have her, well, I got a chance to speak with her about it, but I never got a chance to show her this photo and see if she could pick herself out from the photo. But let's be honest, she was about 10 years old at the time. You see the little girl sticking her head in between the two ladies right there? I have a feeling that was probably her. Yeah, because she was the designated girl speaker on that particular day. Okay. So for the next few minutes, I want to just speak to you about, in Girl Scouting, we always talk about the 3 C's, and jokingly people talk about crafts, camping, and cookies. But in contemporary Girl Scouts, it's courage, confidence, and character. But we have 3 particular C's that we're going to talk about this afternoon, which are captains, camp and cookies. For captains, which basically captain was the term for leader, Girl Scout leader, back in the early days of Girl Scouting. And we do know that there were at least 3 ladies from the Congregation Mikveh Israel who were early Girl Scout leaders in not just in Savannah, but in the whole Girl Scout movement. And those ladies were Miss Leonora Amram, Miss Henrietta Falk, and Miss Mildred Guggenheimer. The item that you see at the bottom is the certificate for Miss Mildred's troop, which was known as the Cornflower Troop, but it was also troop number 5. And this particular item was, this image was loaned to us from the temple. It is in their collection, as is, I believe, the photo that you see there as well, which is also Troop 11, which was associated with the temple as well. Okay, so we do have in the collection, though, some of the paperwork from Mrs. Amram. She was very meticulous about keeping her paperwork. Miss Dawn would have loved her. So if you see these 2 particular items are registration forms from the early days of Girl Scouting. I don't have her earlier forms, unfortunately, but the form on the left is for the 1921-22 year. That is the earliest one that we actually have in our collection. But it is it gives you, I love it. It just gives the girls' names and their addresses and their years, so you can go and track them down even today if you needed to. No, I'm kidding. But the form on the right is the first form that we have where it actually shows that Mrs. Amram was a member of Girl Scouting since 1912, since the beginning. And her troop was, looking at the roster of girls, having kind of paid attention to it for the first time in that detail, was a very diverse group as well. Unless there was more than one, that first girl, the girls are listed alphabetically, but the first girl that you'll see on that list is Miss Mabel Anderson, who was actually a member of, she was a cousin of Juliet Lowe. So she was a member of Mrs. Amram's troop. Okay. So now let's talk for a moment about cookies. So Girl Scout cookies officially began in 1917. There was a troop of Girl Scouts in Oklahoma who, Muskogee, Oklahoma to be specific, who baked and sold cookies in their school cafeteria as a fundraiser to send care packages to doughboys back during World War I. So our cookies not only have been around for a really long time, they've also been used to do good in our community as well. That was how they were envisioned. That was how they started from the very beginning. So at first, Girl Scouts did bake their own cookies. And then there were actually recipes that were published in the Girl Scout magazines, and they would give you tips on being a polite cookie entrepreneur, and tell you should sell them for so much money per dozen. But then after a while, this little cottage industry of Girl Scout cookies kind of got out of hand. The girls couldn't quite keep up with the demand. So they started partnering with bakeries in their hometown. Now, the first commercially baked Girl Scout cookies were in Philadelphia in 1928. But just a few years later, the Girl Scouts in Savannah decided that they needed help baking their cookies as well. So they put together a committee. If you can see from the newspaper article on the side with the 3 ladies staring at each other very intently, they're coming up with a list of the committee members. Largely these committee members were, let's be honest, they were dads of some of the Girl Scouts that lived in the area, who agreed to taste as many cookies as needed to get the job done, to pick the baker of choice at that time period. So they had a blind taste testing event here at First Headquarters. The photo that you see up in the corner is actually the room we're sitting in right now, almost exactly where that table is in the middle of the room. And they literally blindfolded the judges and had them taste the various cookies. And the cookie that they happened to choose was an oatmeal cookie from Gottlieb's Bakery. which of course had the added benefit of being kosher. So it had a broad appeal to many people. Everybody loves a good oatmeal cookie. So while we're on this screen, though, I do want to take a moment to point out, if you can see where my cursor is, this gentleman right here in the photo, just to bring in a bit more Savannah trivia and fun. That particular gentleman is Mr. E.J. O'Connor. He was the father of local Girl Scouts. Miss Mary Flannery O'Connor. So Flannery O'Connor's father was one of the taste testers to help pick out the cookie for the first commercial Girl Scout cookie sale in Savannah. Now, in the parlance of the kids today, as they like to say, receipts or it didn't happen. So just, you know, like pictures or it didn't happen. So we do actually have receipts from the first Girl Scout cookie sale. There's our Gottlieb's Bakery receipt, which I love. It is for 7,697 dozen cookies. And it cost the Girl Scouts, with the little bags that they came in, a grand total of $581.49 for their big fundraiser that year. And the girls would pre-sell the cookies and then deliver the cookies, but there were also several businesses that would basically sponsor. They would kind of like what we would call a cookie booth today. They would allow the girls to just bring in bags and folks would buy from that particular business. And we do have one of the letters from that particular year of 1936 from B.H. Levy, I think Sons, Brothers, I apologize, I can't. From B.H. Levy, anyway, yeah. And they, oh, there we go, B.H. Levy Brothers and Company. I wanted to say Sons, but where they were able to sell basically $50 worth of cookies for the girls that year. So, all right, so our cookies.
Morgan, can you go back one screen?
Go back one screen? Absolutely.
Oh, Jamie, I mean, it says Morgan.
Yeah.
To that the picture with the delicious, delicious.
Yes.
I don't know which person it was because I can't read it match it up that closely, but Edgar Wartsman was apparently was one of those people.
Okay.
One of those men, and he was a member of Mikveh Israel.
Oh, wonderful.
And his
Just
daughter.
to add that too.
His daughter.
Some of you may, Jane, you would remember Sydney and Gertrude. You might remember Edgar. Got to unmute. Unmute. There you go.
They lived at 37th and Drayton.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
Worksman, I think, around the corner from your grandparents.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Sydney's daughter was also a member of the Girl Scouts. She was a contemporary of Henrietta's.
And Sydney and Edgar were brothers.
And Sid, okay, so this would have been, she would have been his niece. He
Yeah.
would have been her uncle.
Just add that in. Sorry.
I am
Sorry to
absolutely.
interrupt.
There will be follow-up questions. I've always said, and Ms. Dawn can tell you, there's always more things to do than time in a day, but I've always wanted to just take copies of photos and go around to different communities in Savannah and sit down and say, who are these people? Help me, and see if we can figure out who some of these folks are, because unfortunately, as time passes, we lose a lot of the context, of course, that these stories, you know, tell us. And I don't want to lose that. I want to make sure that we protect and preserve that part of our Girl Scout legacy.
If you're interested, I know his Edgar Wertzman's great niece, and could, you know, get you in touch whether if you want to follow up. She may know some. His niece actually just passed away about a year and a half ago.
Aww. I would appreciate that.
My mother and she were very close friends.
It happens when you get in your upper 90s.
It does. It does. My mother's on her way to see, there's a huge generation gap in my family, and my mother is in her 70s, and she's on her way to see her sister today, who is in her 90s. Yeah, the coronavirus has not, the self-isolating part of it has been particularly challenging. So,
Yeah.
Yes.
yes.
Well,
You know
let me
who-
just
Okay, go ahead.
I'm 86 years old. I was born in Savannah. I was a Girl Scout from I guess, the age of 12. I know who a lot of these people in a lot of these pictures are, and I'm living a block and a half from Girl Scout First headquarters, so I can help you with some of these IDs.
I'm going to come track you down, or we'll have a party here one day, because the museum is still currently closed, so we can.
Well, so am I currently closed. So.
Spread out. So, Mr. Victor, were you on when we were showing the photo of the girl that I have self-identified in my own imagination as your mom in
No.
the 1927?
No.
Okay. Would y'all mind if I back up for just a second to show Mr. Victor?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see if I can.
I was looking at the girl on the left end when she showed that, Herbert.
Let's see if I can go back just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so the photo at the bottom is the 1927 photo, or from 1927. It is a picture from the national during the national convention that October. It is the picture of Lou Henry Hoover in front of First Headquarters. The gentleman in the middle in the black suit is the mayor of Savannah, and then the lady to whom he is speaking is Mrs. Hoover. And so I never had the chance to ask Miss Henrietta to identify herself in this particular photo, but looking at it more closely, if you notice, there is a young girl basically not quite standing in line with those adults, but kind of right behind them, and she's sticking her head through, and she looks about 10 years old, and in my own imagination, I want to say that's Miss Henrietta.
It could be.
Yeah. Henrietta was born in 1920.
So she
So
would
she
be
would have been a
7.
7.
Oh, okay. Huh. Well, we'll have to definitely.
I don't know it's so fuzzy, I really can't tell.
Right. Unfortunately, I used the system I was using did not keep the crispness of this particular image, so I'll have to do a higher resolution scan, and we can really kind of zoom
Yeah, I'd
in.
love to look at it because some of those other little girls may be her buddies.
Absolutely, we can make
Yeah.
that happen.
Do you have copies of the things that
Yeah.
Henrietta had?
Yeah, she does.
Well, she brought her copy of her speech one time, and we did get a chance to make a scan of that. Unfortunately, the system that it was housed on did crash at one time.
Still have it.
So we don't have that, no ma'am.
Okay, we have it. We also have I think it's an original or a copy, I'm not sure. We probably scanned it because we were afraid of it deteriorating, of when Lou Henry Hoover did visit, and Henrietta and several of her friends are in Girl Scout uniforms that went down to meet
I wonder.
Mrs. Hoover, and it's actually an autographed copy.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
So maybe we need to
I
round
think-
those things up and drop them by.
We would love that. I remember the day that Miss Henrietta came by with her, so that we can make a scan of her speech, and we happened to have a room full of Girl Scouts that we were giving a tour to at that time, and the young lady that was leading the tour, who herself is the great niece of an early Girl Scout here in Savannah. I asked her to basically tell that story of young Miss Henrietta, delivering the speech in front of the First Lady, and Miss Henrietta was, in the room, and at the very end, Jessica was able to say, "And here she is," and the girls, you would have thought I said, "And here's Britney Spears,"
I heard about that. That was very
She was
touching.
also very excited.
Yeah, she was.
It was one of those wonderful moments that you just love to see. Yeah, Girl Scout celebrity moment, exactly. All right.
Okay.
We will make
Sorry
progress.
for the interruption.
Oh, no, ma'am. All right. So for just a moment now, we're also going to talk about camp, our Girl Scout camp. So Girl Scout camp, we have had 3 camps here in Savannah, 3 properties, I should say. The first Girl Scout camp was basically a property that we didn't own. It just kind of formed around a particular person, Mr. Walter Hoxie, who was leading nature study in the area, including for some of the early Girl Scouts, had a house out at Thunderbolt, basically, around where Savannah State is today,
Oh,
near
okay.
near Bonabella.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
Camp Lowlands kind of formed around that. And then the second property was called Camp Walila.
That's where Mama
which
went.
we'll get into a little bit later. And we currently have Camp Low out on Rosedew Island. But before we had dedicated properties, our first official Girl Scout trip, which was led by some of the early captains that we talked about earlier, took place out on Wausau Island. And we jokingly refer to it today as the Maroon Camp. We always talk to the girls, every once in a while we'll have an event out at camp and we'll kind of bill it as a survivor weekend where you're going to come in and we're going to, you're going to not have electricity and you're going to have to learn how to build a fire and cook over the fire outdoors and, traditional Girl Scout skills. And that's basically what this was, except on sugar and caffeine and just kind of out of control. So they basically had a ship take them out to Wausau Island and drop them off. Each girl had a canteen and a bedroll, and that was in her little ditty bag, and that was basically it. They took fishing poles and matches and so forth, but it very quickly became miserable. The bugs were awful. There's only one source of fresh water out on the island, and apparently they were quite some ways from it. Thunderstorms rolled in that afternoon. They had no shelter, and it was miserable. So the next day there were some, and I apologize, I needed to check this. It was either Presbyterian or Methodist ministers who were coming by in a boat fishing, and they flagged them down and said, "Could you send help back? We want to go home now." So that was the first Girl Scout camp experience. And usually when I'm talking to the girls and I tell them about it, I'm like, but that's okay. Everybody made it home. Everybody survived. And now that's why we make all the adults take all that training and have all those forms before you can go camping. So the next year when the girls went camping, they went camping slightly differently. They actually went camping at the Fresh Air Home on Tybee Island. That was their form of camping that year. So yeah, slightly different. But years later, of course, as I said, we had camp. And you can see, I mean, bless, if you look at this picture, if somebody said, "Hey, Jamie, meet me at camp," and I showed up at camp in my kitten-heeled ankle boots and my shirtwaist blouse and my straw hat with big ostrich feathers on it, like some of these ladies right over here, I mean, you could just imagine. I can't imagine going camping like that, but bless it, they did. So good for them. I love the spirit of adventure, and yeah, let's just get outdoors and have fun. So speaking of camp, I'm watching a face on my screen right now. You get in there close, Miss Jane. I want you to see this. Can you see? Yeah, we're gonna play a game and see if you happen to notice anyone in these photos that you may know who may be on our call right now.
Sarah Jane Moore is on there. Is that me on the left end?
Well,
Looks like it.
I see
I
Jane
think
right there.
I
this
think
is
Wow.
that's Jane.
little Miss Baby Jane right here.
I wasn't much of a camper.
That's all right, Miss Jane. Neither am I.
You were there.
You were there.
Betty Schuster's mother was a leader. She's in the tree.
Oh, okay.
A different troop than mine.
Mhm. Do you remember, Miss Jane, who brought the baby? Do you remember that by chance?
Jane,
I'm looking at the baby, but I don't. Huh.
And then right over here, this particular stunner in her senior Girl Scout
Oh,
uniform
me. That's me.
with sash. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Jane, you haven't changed a bit.
Boy, I love you, Herb, and I always did.
Yeah, well, it's the truth. You look just the same.
That's fun.
Well, this is Camp Walila, which was if you go out Highway 80, like you're going to the islands, where the flyover is, where there's the Walmart and the Publix.
Yeah.
So it was basically right there on the river. And the house that is the lodge, that was the lodge, is still there.
Mhm.
So, Miss Jane, we may have to take a little road trip one day.
I didn't know that was
And
there.
property.
It is still there. And a few years ago, because people had told me it had been torn down to make room for houses on the river. And don't get me wrong, I believe that, could have happened, but I just didn't want to let it go at that. So I kind of went trespassing one day and found the house. And there was actually an original Girl Scout cabin still left there, which I love it too. The cabins that were at Camp Walila were donated to the Girl Scouts by the city of Savannah. They were actually the old voting booths that used to sit around in the squares and the medians. And it was, the city didn't donate these cabins to the Girl Scouts until later in the 1920s. So the first time women went to vote in Savannah, they went to vote in these little booths that eventually became the Girl Scout cabins. They're tiny little things. They're about 10 feet by 8 feet. It's just enough room for 2 cots and each girl to have a trunk, and then a little orange crate night table basically in between. But there was still one of the cabins sitting there, and the gentleman who owned it donated it to us. And so we took it apart and moved it out to our current Girl Scout camp on Rosedew Island. And it's called our alumni cabin, and it's been lovingly and painstakingly preserved and restored. And we have some, wonderful vintage pictures in it as well. And it's in a lovely little spot by the fishing pond out at camp. So if anybody ever wants to go out there and take a look at that, we would love to have you join us out there. Okay.
You can't just drive in there, can you?
It is gated, Miss Jane. Now I can, if you ever want to go, I can call and make sure that there's not anything strange going on the island. Sometimes the DNR will help us burn out there and so forth. But yeah, if you ever want to go out there, just let me know and I'll call and make sure that it's okay. And I can give you the code to get in the gate.
Well, thank you,
Yes, ma'am.
Herbert.
Road trip. Okay. All right. So our Girl Scout promise, for just a moment, we're going to talk about service to our community and also how that service to our community also reflects back on the religious education of some of the girls, because it can go hand in hand. And then we're going to talk about our Girl Scout sisterhood again for just a moment. So just to talk about Girl Scout service through the years, of course, we talked about those Girl Scout cookies back during World War I, but when Girl Scouts first started, very quickly, of course, it was followed by the start of World War I. So during World War I, Girl Scouts did everything from collect peach pits to roll bandages to sell war bonds to help with the war effort. In the Great Depression, girls grew gardens and would actually take the food that they grew to soup kitchens, and then they would staff the soup kitchens as well. And to back up a little bit as well, during the Spanish flu epidemic, girls in certain cities, especially larger cities, would open basically like a soup delivery service, if you will. The Girl Scouts would meet every day and make gallons and gallons and gallons of soup, and then they would go out and deliver them to people who were basically sheltering or who were homesick with the flu, And in different cities, Girl Scouts were actually credited with basically making sure that people didn't starve and had enough nutritional content to actually recover from the flu if they caught it. Also, Girl Scouts, even though Girl Scouts weren't overtly, they didn't entirely fight for women's suffrage. That wasn't, some Girl Scouts did, some didn't. That's kind of a, Girl Scouts is, we're not political. We do believe in we're not political, we're not religious. We believe that's up to a girl and her family. But a lot of Girl Scouts said this is really important and we want to do that. And they also wanted to support the women who were going to vote for the first time. So Girl Scouts would offer basically babysitting services for women who went to vote or who were fighting for their right to vote prior to that. So that was in the 19-teens and 20s for the most part. Again, in the 30s during the Depression, the soup kitchens and growing the gardens and so forth. In the 1940s for World War II, we could sit here all day long and talk about all of the service that Girl Scouts rendered. But one of the big projects here in Savannah, and the photo with the truck in the bottom corner helps illustrate this. The girls would were active in a program called Clothing for Friendship, where they would collect clothing and gently used clothing and toys and books, and they would bundle them up in boxes and send them over to Europe, specifically for the children, especially for the children who had lost everything, just as a way to reach out to other children. And then that photo in the opposite corner is basically girls coming in with those kids to First Headquarters. That particular program basically evolved and changed into a program called Kits for Korea in the 1950s, which was the same idea. Then in the 1960s, Girl Scouts picked up the environmental mantle, if you will. Also during the 1960s, with the influx of Vietnamese refugees, there was an effort from Girl Scouts to actually befriend the refugees and kind of help them acclimate to their new life in the United States. And then in the 1980s, there was a push by Girl Scouts to help on the fight for literacy and the fight against drugs, and also against child abuse and youth suicide, which was, the topics are so broad and so varied what these girls were doing. And then in the 1990s, one of the programs that Girl Scouts became involved with and actually developed was called Girl Scouts Beyond Bars, which was a mother-daughter program, and it was specifically aimed at the daughters of mothers who were in prison. So they would take the girls would go into the prisons with their mothers, and we would hold Girl Scout troop meetings with the moms and the daughters and teaching them skills and life lessons and so forth. And it was just as powerful and impactful on the mothers as it was on the daughters. So some of these programs aren't, again, it's not crafts and it's not cookies and it's not camping, but the impact that these programs have had, building these girls of courage, confidence, and character sometimes are immeasurable. And even more today, even more contemporary today, in the 2000s, at one point, Girl Scouts, usually we give service, we don't give money, but President Bush asked the Girl Scouts to help the children of Afghanistan. So Girl Scouts collected over, their membership collected over $1 million to send to help the children of Afghanistan. So again, just the power of these little girls is both amazing and inspiring and limitless. So yeah. Today in Girl Scouting, the girls learn to advocate for themselves and others, and again, build girls of courage, confidence, and character. We have a series of awards in Girl Scouting. You're supposed to leave the world, make the world a better place. And so as junior Girl Scouts, the girls can they work collectively as a troop on their Bronze Award. When they're in middle school as Cadet Girl Scouts, they can work on their Silver Award. And then in high school, the girls can work on their Gold Award, which is the highest award in Girl Scouting. It is incredibly difficult to earn, but it is all of the projects are amazing and worthwhile. I always joke, and I'm not being disparaging to the Boy Scouts at all, but people always know what the Eagle Scout Award is, but you don't often know you don't often hear about the Gold Award, and you kind of often have to say it's like the Eagle Scout, but it's really not, because the Eagle Scout Award, time-wise and for the scope of the project, is actually closer to our Silver Award. Our Gold Award is a step beyond that. It's kind of like the saying about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. They did the same thing, but Ginger Rogers was, doing it backwards and in high heels. That's kind of how this works as well. One of my program aides here at First Headquarters, just to give you an example of a Gold Award project, and it's funny, she went to college, her freshman year of college, and she started dating this young man who was an Eagle Scout. And I was like, that's just adorable. Let's be honest, you with your Gold Award and him with this Eagle Scout. And so they were talking one day, and he was kind of picking at her a little bit, and she was like, all right, what was your Eagle Scout project? And he said, oh, well, I built benches for a school campus. And she was like, oh, that's cute. Let me tell you about my project. A Gold Award project has to address a problem in your community, and it can't just be a Band-Aid on the problem. It has to address the root of the problem. And it can't just be what we call a one and done. Oh, there are hungry people in my community, I'm going to do a food drive, the end. No, it has to be sustainable, so that when the girl takes her hands off the project, it keeps going. Okay. So the young lady that I was talking about, her project was, she lived in Effingham County, and the rate of poverty in Effingham County is considerable. And so she started looking at the roots of poverty, and one of the roots of poverty is the lack of education. When do children drop out of school? And why do they drop out of school? Well, lack of opportunity, they need to go to work, but also they don't ever have that firm foundation under them in the school system. And so she started asking around, and it turned out that the pre-K programs in her neighboring, like her community school, the children had no access to the school library. And of course, the younger a child learns to read, the younger they love to read, and the more education they usually acquire. They'll do better in school and sometimes attain a higher level of education. So she was like, this is literally fundamental. I can address this. So she went to her school principal, the neighboring principal, neighborhood principal, and asked if she could build a library for the pre-K. And he said, absolutely. So she started about collecting books, and she bartered and traded and gave service to acquire more books. And she partnered with several different organizations that would provide books to the children in that program. Every year the kids get signed up, and every month they receive a book for 5 years or so of their life. She built a library for that school with, appropriate books. And then she was a member of the Beta Club and the National Honor Society. And both of those organizations, the kids have to perform service. So she had both of the organizations at her high school promise to send sign up members of those organizations to go to that school every day, every morning, because every child in that school receives free breakfast. And during breakfast time, these honor roll kids, these National Honor Society kids, these Beta Club kids go in and read to the children. And so they also have this mentorship. So that was her Gold Award project. And when she was done, when it was over, it was done. She had earned her Gold Award, the end. the principals of the other 2 elementary schools in Effingham County, who were basically in the same situation, called her and said, "Will you do this for our school?" And she said yes. So she turned around and did it twice more, even though she didn't have to. So that's the kind of work that our older girls are doing to earn their gold award and to make our world a better place, starting at the community level. So these girls are amazing. Okay.
Jamie, just interrupt you for one quick second.
Mhm.
Normally, Food for Thought wraps up around 2 o'clock, but everybody's really engaged. And Jamie, as long as you don't mind talking, would y'all like to continue a little longer?
I think there's only about 2 more slides.
I didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted to be respectful of everyone's usual time. So keep going.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And well, wait, hold on. I had sent it in writing, but why is it that Peach Pit saves soldiers' lives?
Okay, that is a great question. So during World War I, one of the most devastating weapons was mustard gas.
Right.
And mustard gas can be filtered out with carbon. So they had to create, I'm sure you've seen the gas mask filter or the gas mask, from World War I. In the filter of the gas mask were these carbon filters, and they were manufactured from walnut shells and peach pits primarily. So Girl Scouts, especially in this area, made a concerted effort, to go out and collect peach pits. So they would ask people to save their peach pits. They'd go around and collect them from their homes. They would have little stations where people could drop them off. So the Girl Scouts were collecting people's nasty peach pits and cleaning them and sending them off so that they could be turned into carbon filters for
That's amazingly resourceful. I mean, I know it's a total aside, but is there anybody who uses them in that type of capacity anymore? I mean, obviously not for a soldier's mask, but to create carbon filters?
I'm not sure. That's a great question. The girls did basically, there was a very similar thing during World War II, not so much in our area, but if you've ever seen, especially the pilots that had those puffy collars on their jackets, the puffy collars were essentially flotation devices, should the plane go down at sea or over the water. And they were full of milkweed pods that were collected by Girl Scouts as well.
Amazing.
Yeah. All sorts of things that the girls did. During World War II, one of my favorite things that Girl Scouts did that we don't really get, that they don't get a lot of credit for, is babysitting, because of course we know that women went to work during the war to help keep the country going. We always talk about, the Rosies and, working in the shipyards and working on the farms and just picking up, whatever needed to be done. But what we don't really talk about is how prior to World War II, there was really never a need for daycare, because of course, most women stayed at home with their children. But before these women could go to work, quite often they had to find reliable daycare. So Girl Scouts stepped up and they opened up free daycare centers all across the United States, so the mothers could leave their children with the Girl Scouts while they went to work for the nation. So yeah, all sorts of amazing things. Okay, and then we have, hold on. There we go. And just going back to our Girl Scout family, our Girl Scout sisterhood, and Miss Juliet's dedication that Girl Scouting should be available basically to any girl who wanted to join. Now, having said that, she was also very realistic. She knew that this idea was not going to be accepted everywhere. So basically on what we would say today a council level, she allowed each council to decide to whom Girl Scouting would be extended in their community. So in Savannah, as I said, religiously fairly diverse for, that time period, which, would not necessarily have been the norm in other places. But in larger cities, especially more northern cities, the more diverse the population, the more diverse the membership in Girl Scouting. And one of the things from the very beginning is there were no boxes to check, you know, what race do you identify as, what religion or anything like that. It was just, here's your membership form. So here's some just early photos. The photo of the lady with the group of Girl Scouts towards the top of your screen, that is Miss Birdsall Edie. And you can see there is a diverse group of girls around her. That is a photo from the 19-teens in New York City. Also to the side of your screen, you can see there is a Chinese American Girl Scout. And if you notice the Girl Scout poster to which she is pointing in the background, you can see it's actually written in Chinese. And that was to recruit girls of different ethnicities, different backgrounds. One of my favorite, Juliette Lowe, of course, was quite a character. And she did all sorts of crazy things that I could tell you stories and you would go, wait, what? But my favorite, one of my favorite Juliette Lowe stories is she had a pilot who, Mr. Lawrence, who had a biplane. And she had him meet her at the airfield on this particular day, and she brought a box with her, and the box had Girl Scout flyers in it. She put it in the plane. She got in the plane. He took off, and there's actually video of this. Took off from this airfield in New Jersey, and when they took off, they were actually timing it so that they were in between the changes in shifts at different factories. And she had him buzz up and down the streets of New York City in this airplane with her with this box of Girl Scout flyers. And as the children, the girls were coming out or going into the factories for their shifts, she would just throw out flyers and rain down flyers for Girl Scouts on all of these girls. So yeah. Going back to her Girl Guiding days in England and Scotland, she would actually go to the factories, put up flyers and say, at your tea time, come and join me outside. I'll provide tea for you. And we're going to have a Girl Scout badge lesson. So she was specifically reaching out to girls, not just to join Girl Scouts as a diversion, but for girls who really needed the program as well. And that's something we've always been mindful of in Girl Scouts. So of course we want the girls to come and have fun and have adventures and so forth, but we also want them to come away with skills that will, you know, empower them for the rest of their lives. And then the bottom photo that you see in that particular, on this particular slide is also a group of Native American Girl Scouts. So there were efforts in the early days of Girl Scouting in the 19-teens. They were recruiting Girl Scouts. There was a couple of troops for physically handicapped girls. They reached out to Native American girls to form Girl Scout troops as well. Mexican American girls down along the southwest border. So again, just an effort to make Girl Scouting an organization for all girls. In this particular photo, the photo you see with a group of children in a circle, that is a Girl Scout meeting at a Japanese internment camp in the United States during World War II. The local Girl Scouts around some of the internment camps says, we want to go in. We want to reach out to these children. They are our sisters. They are our fellow citizens, and we're going to be a part of their lives. Sorry. It just kind of made me think for a moment. Last year I had a lady come into First Headquarters, and I happened to be in the shop, and she came in and she had just signed her daughter up for Girl Scouting, and she wanted to get her uniform. And, you know, the lady had, you know, an accent, and I would never ask where she's from, but if I had to guess, I would say somewhere in North Africa anyway. And so she said they had just moved here and she wanted her daughter to be a Girl Scout. You know, that was something she wanted for her daughters, that she'd always heard about Girl Scouts, and she wanted her daughter to be a Girl Scout. And so fast forward a few months, the little girl, and I say little girl, she's a middle schooler, came to an event that we had out at camp. And, you know, again, we don't ask girls to check boxes or anything like that, but when they come to an event at camp, we do have that, you know, do you have any food restrictions? You know, and it can be, I'm allergic to peanuts, I'm allergic to dairy, I'm gluten-free, I'm vegetarian, you know, or I can't eat pork or whatever. whatever it is, put it on the form and we're going to do our best to accommodate you. And so one morning the girls came over and they, you know, when they got there, we said, go pick out your cabin. We don't care where you stay. Just let us know, you know, which one you're in. And so the girls went and found their own cabins and made new friends. They came in the next morning for the girls that were in the cabin together. And it was this particular girl and another young lady that I know that was raised vegetarian, and then another girl, and they all came up to me. And one of the girls said, Miss Jamie, what are we having for breakfast? And I was like, oh, I don't know, sweetie. I think we're having like eggs and, you know, biscuits and yogurt and fruit and whatever. And they said, oh, good. We were worried that we were going to have bacon. And I was like, I don't think we're having bacon this morning. And they were like, oh, good. Because none of us eat pork. And the girls, none of them identified as any, you know, they didn't have the conversation about why they don't eat pork, but none of them ate pork. You know, one was vegetarian, one was Muslim. Anyway, so that was the cabin. They didn't care. They were just like, we just don't want bacon this morning. I'm like, all right, you can have the yogurt. Okay. So yeah, so my personal thought is if we put 10-year-old girls in charge of the world, no one would be hungry. There'd be no war. Nobody would have to worry about where your medical treatment was coming from. Everybody would be safe and everything would be really glittery. Yeah. Okay, so moving forward from that, my apologies. So there were also concerted efforts, of course, to integrate Girl Scouting completely in areas that had been slightly more resistant to it. Savannah was completely integrated in the Girl Scout movement by the early 1940s, which is surprising to some people. The photo in the bottom corner of the young girls on parade, the lady who is standing in that particular picture, the lady was a leader at that time, but she was one of the first African-American Girl Scouts in Savannah. And again, that was just an effort that the local Girl Scouts said, we're going to do this. And far ahead of the national curve, the Girl Scouts basically were leading the way in that particular movement. They actually received great kudos from different sources, including Dr. King, that the Girl Scouts were a force for desegregation in the South. And we actually had our first integrated troop in Savannah by the 1950s, which was hosted at the Unitarian Universalist Church on Troop Square. And that was led by Dr. Martha Fay. Okay. All right, so that's pretty much the end of my presentation today. You just have a few pictures here at First Headquarters. So of course, if you want any more information or you ever want to just get out and about, come on down and see us, and just all sorts of fun opportunities and things that the girls are doing. Oh, okay, I didn't, now that we've come back around full circle, the young lady right here, this is the young lady that I was talking about that did the Gold Award project with the libraries out in, for the pre-K out in Effingham County. And then this young lady right here, a Daisy in this picture, is now in high school. And she is the one that was one of the girls that was out at camp, and she came in that morning. She's a vegetarian, and she was like, Miss Jamie, are we having bacon? I was like, no, baby. So yeah, just all these wonderful memories and wonderful opportunities through Girl Scouts to help build these girls of courage, confidence, and character who make the world a better place.
Jamie?
So I apologize for going over, but if anyone has any questions, I will gladly answer them either now or through email later.
One of the questions that I was texted and asked, which is one of the reasons we're recording it, is what progressive change do you see that the future of Girl Scouts kind of might have? And clearly everything you've shown kind of says that they've been on the cutting edge of being progressive and inclusive and all that. But where do you see the future of Girl Scouts going? That
to me, one of the reasons it's been so progressive starts back with Juliette Lowe. Juliet Lowe said, and I can never remember the quote exactly, but when she was talking about the future of Girl Scouting, she was like, look, I can imagine what Girl Scouts is going to be like in 10 years, but realistically, they're going to be so far beyond that what I'm imagining is going to be like a memory by the time you actually get there. These kids are moving so far forward. And she was always very adamant, when leaders would say, well, what do we do with the girls? And Miss Juliet would say, what do the girls want to do? And so we are a girl leadership experience. It's not just, a fun thing to do after school. And don't get me wrong, if we have to start off small with the daisies and the brownies and give them smaller opportunities, but we still try to build in that leadership aspect for them. We let them take charge of some of the activities they're going to do. They help plan them. And then by the time they get to be older girls, there is no question that they are not afraid to speak their mind and basically take this program the way that they want it to go. Like right now, girls have always been interested in STEM, but have had limited opportunities for whatever reason. But for right now, our Girl Scout programming is we still have traditional opportunities like camping and learning how to cook and different life skills and first aid and so forth. But we have a series of robotics badges, engineering badges, computer programming badges. Just the badges that the girls have now that they can earn. And then even yesterday, I had a few girls who work for me here at First Headquarters who are paid employees, but then I have several girls that are also sporadic volunteers. And given what's been happening in the country for the last week or so, we actually have a pin. It's called a diversity pin, and it is a program with merit, but whoever wrote it originally, it was geared for much younger girls. And I said, here, I want you to rewrite this, whatever you want to do. And so there are girls of different racial and ethnic backgrounds in that group. And I said, whatever it is, if you want to talk about race relations, if you want to talk about one of the girls, her father is an Apache, and so she is very passionate about the government still coming in and taking Native American lands. I said, whatever it is that is on your heart, what makes you angry, what you want to educate people about, what you wish they knew, put it in there. So I talked to this group of girls yesterday, and they're getting together, and I am both excited by and kind of terrified by what they may put in front of me in the next week or so. But that is how we move forward. We listen to the girls. We love to keep our Girl Scout traditions, camping and songs and s'mores and things like that. But those are the things that those are some of the traditions that unite us. But the girl leadership is the one thing that keeps us moving forward. So yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Anybody else have anything for Jamie?
No questions, but I love listening to you because you have such a vast knowledge of Girl Scouts and everything that goes into it then and now. So it's really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. I've made a note to make copies or scan in the photos and Henrietta's speech to email to you. Is it the same email address we've had?
Probably so. The jbrantley@gshg.org.
Let me see if that's the one I still have.
I think I have your email, Ms. Teresa. I'll email you because I want to send you a higher resolution of that photo so y'all can take some time to look at it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Did you come up with a number of girls that this area is serving right now?
The council serves around 14,000 girls right now. Savannah specifically, I'm honestly not.
That's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
About 3 years ago, which is the last time I was involved, we had about 3,000 girls.
How many?
Between 2,500 and 3,000 girls in the Chatham County general area. I'm not
So
sure.
we've grown.
It could be
Yeah, we are growing. We have actually had a significant amount of growth in the last few years. So
Yeah, and one of the pieces to that growth is that there's an anti-bullying program that they bring into the public schools. It's actually all around the council, which is the whole state except Metro Atlanta. But we have one full-time person who does nothing but go into the schools to deliver that program and some other programs for the younger girls. And she's in the schools all day long, every day. So in different schools. So it's
That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was very proud to work for the Girl Scouts. That's all I can tell you. And when I listen to Jamie, I'm even prouder. It's so awesome.
come back.
God.
Well, it's funny. I think I've told Dawn this story. When we've lived in Savannah now 3.5 years, but before that we lived in Maryland, and there were 2 girls. They were Girl Scouts on our block. They would try to get my daughter involved. She was not interested. She would buy the cookies, but had no desire. We moved to Savannah, and she found out this is where the Girl Scouts started. And for the 2 years she was at Rambam, she was part of the troop. And it was so interesting to see, like, it was her way to connect to her new city, but to be in a troop that she had always seen. And the funny thing is, the girls that she had seen, she had never seen a Jewish Girl Scout or even a white Girl Scout. So for her, it was a way to, like, see other kids like her in her new city, which was so funny when you think she's not a minority, but in her head, she always was, just because of who she was exposed to. So it was such a fantastic experience for her. She decided she didn't want to do it anymore when she switched schools, but she still has her little stash with all her badges proudly hanging up. And every time we see a Girl Scout, whether we need cookies or not, she's like, "Mommy, I used to do that. We need to have some." So
Oh, yeah.
I get it. Once a Girl Scout, always a Girl Scout, I guess.
I think so.
I will mention not to turn this into a membership plug, but one of the rules that they've changed recently for the girls, and I love this, is one of the reasons that girls will stick with the program longer through Girl Scouting is the opportunity for travel, especially international travel. So now older Girl Scouts, when I say older, I say middle school, that's middle school and above, they can actually take their cookie proceeds each year now and use those roll them over to pay towards a trip. So we have several girls that, are working towards, like a 2-week European jaunt that is going to be completely paid for by their cookie sales for, 4 years, basically. So.
Very nice.
We were supposed to be sending about 20 girls to Spain for 10 days next month, but unfortunately now
Oh,
that's not happening.
well, this has been wonderful. Thank you, Orly, and
Thank you,
thank
Jamie.
you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And
Thank you, Orly.
Our
so,
pleasure.
first
Maybe one of your girls can teach me how to do Zoom.
I think you're doing fine.
you're doing amazing.
I think that's Orly.
If you ever have any questions, I've got a 10-year-old who she's 11 now, sorry, who knows more than I do with all the classes she had to take. She came over to me the other day and she goes, "Mommy, you're doing something the long way. Let me show you the shortcuts."
Oh.
So they're experts.
Yeah, they seems to be genetic with the younger kids.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just a
Thank
simple
you.
plug for Food for Thought. If you check the Facebook page, we have some great talks coming up in the next 2 months. Everything through the end of July has been booked and put on there. If you have any questions or need a direct link, the link that you used for today will be the same Food for Thought link for all of them.
Okay.
That way it's really simple.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Orly.
My pleasure. And thank you again, Jamie. This was fantastic.
Thank you again so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.